Blue Jays fans in Toronto and across Canada joining us live on Sportsnet. Welcome to Rogers Center, home of your Toronto Blue Jays for the 2014 Honda Home Opener. Please direct your attention to the video board for a special presentation to recognize 2013 Rawlings Gold Glove winner, R.A. Dickey.
It is Sportsfeld Storytime. Thank you for joining us. We are going back to 2014 to talk about the team that almost was, the Toronto Blue Jays team that in short contention for maybe the most frustrating seasons we can remember. 2021 company, of course, not excluded. A very interesting year, a year that you brought up a couple times actually in the middle of the 2021 summer. That sort of was a team that you were getting, I don't know, pangs of similarity, but sort of a similar track at the time.
This team was like my fear for 2021. I think we, with all we hope they're like 2015 or whatever. In the back of my mind, this whole season, it's kind of been like the one thing I don't want them to be. This team is also a lesson in not paying attention to success or standings before like July.
Absolutely.
This team was on May 28th, 2014. They were 32-22 and 3 games up in first place in the AL East. And they did not finish 3 games up on the AL East, as you might be aware.
Yeah, that's hard to believe, but I guess that is sort of the facts. They would finish 13 games back of the division. They would finish, let me see here, do some quick back of the napkin math. It looks like 5 games back of Oakland. So they finished 5 games back of Oakland with get this, Jake, Seattle and New York.
Wow.
As the 2 teams.
what a weird thing.
Seattle, New York, and Cleveland as well. So it was a pretty jam-packed. There was the third seeds in all 3 divisions were at least 83 wins. The Jays finished a little bit back, but yeah, more to your point, sort of the crux of this season and the thing that you were talking about when you were talking about this team was the trade deadline and was their inability to make moves because they were in a position to be a pretty darn good team. And obviously we talked in the previous episode about the trades, about Dickey and about, Reyes and Josh Johnson and all of this. On the day of the deadline, July 31st, 2014, the Blue Jays were 60-50, a game and a half back. They had entered the month up a game. They exited the month a game and a half back. So for all intents and purposes, they were right there and right on the cusp of being a contender at this time. If you remember, we didn't have 2015 yet. So the idea that they would go into August a game and a half back or September be in the mix was extremely tantalizing.
Yeah. And I think that what gets or has gotten lost in the fact that this team sort of collapsed, I guess, is that this was a pretty good team. Like you look at the stats for the lineup, Diarno Navarro was league average behind the plate and Brett Lawrie was league average in the 70 games he played. But like you take out Navarro, Munenori Kawasaki, and Brett Lawrie, and all of a sudden you have Edwin Encarnacion, who OPS'd 901 with a 152 OPS plus and hit 34 home runs. Jose Reyes, scumbag, was actually not great. He was fine.
He played mostly a full season.
Melky Cabrera was very good despite having a tumor in his spine. Colby Rasmus was decent. Jose Bautista was unbelievable this season. Jose Bautista, 35 home runs, 103 RBIs, a 928 OPS, a 162 OPS plus. Adam Lind in 96 games was extremely good this year. And then you look at the deadline and you look at what happened with this team, and you have Munenori Kawasaki playing 82 games.
Wild.
While OPS plusing with 79. You have Juan Francisco, who was actually okay, but still played 106 games. Steven Tollison played 108 games. Anthony Ghost played 94 games. Ryan Goins played 67 games. Danny Valencia played 50 games. Kevin Pillar played 53 games. Also, funny to remember that Kevin Pillar was not like always just a starter in Toronto, and Kevin Pillar was pretty bad in those 53 games he played. But like, for a team to have this many identifiable holes, when you have guys like Edwin and Jose and Melky and Lind who are having great years, and then even the pitching was not great, but the bullpen was outstanding for the most part. And then to be like, okay, they need a starter and they need an infielder, very obviously. And then they just didn't do it. It's like, oh, okay, I see why the team fell apart.
Fly ball deep right field, giving ground. Bautista giving a lot of ground. It is off the fence. Seager to second. Going to third. Getting a wave on. Here's the throw by Bautista. It is not in time. A triple. An RBI triple for Mike Zunino. 4-1 Mariners. Down the line. That is a fair ball. Indy Chavez with an RBI. Zunino scores. Indy digging for second. He'll get there easily. 5-1 Mariners in a 3-run sixth here. Indy picking up his 14th. Brad Miller rides one into the gap. Indy's going to walk home. Brad Miller makes the turn. He's going to go for three. Here's the throw. Not in time. An RBI triple. 6-1 Mariners. They got 4 runs in this inning.
Yeah, the list of their actual transactions down the stretch in June and July is pretty disappointing. I think if you looked at this in 2021, you'd be like, what the hell? They pick up some guys off waivers. They pick up like Nolan Reimold off waivers in the 6th, then Cole Gillespie. They grab Brett Wallace and Brad Mills. And then on the 28th, 2 days before the deadline, they trade Liam Hendricks and Eric Kratz up for Danny Valencia. And I remember wanting anything to happen, and Valencia splits against lefties. I was like, oh my goodness, Danny Valencia. They got a guy who can hit lefties. He obviously would not go on to be much of anything in terms of, he plays 50 games, below average OPS. But yeah, there is no big move. It's so funny. They trade Liam Hendricks like 3 times in 2 years. It's crazy. Look at this. Looking at his, they select him off waivers in February of 2014. They trade him to Kansas City in July of 2014. They trade him back to Toronto in October of 2014. In November of 2015, they trade him to Oakland for Jesse Chavez. All of that just to watch him then turn into one of the best closers in baseball. But I digress. The moves, as you said, the obvious holes, the obvious problems they had, really not addressed. Just Danny Valencia, who was not an everyday guy. He was a platoon piece, not a guy that you're going to look to be a huge piece of this. So apparently a bit of a clubhouse asshole. But that's besides the point. What makes this eye-opening and what sort of, I think, sets the precedent for the coming off season and sets the precedent for, Alex Anthopoulos really putting the chips in is some of the quotes that come out of the dugout from that time. Jose Bautista says, of course, it's disappointing that we somehow weren't able to get anything done, and everybody around us in contention somehow figured it out. He goes on to say, we're in a position where we're in striking distance and not many games left. We could have used a little boost, just like other teams went out and got additions. It's not that you don't feel your team is good enough. It's just that everybody else does that at the deadline. They figure out a way to improve the roster, and somehow we didn't. Casey Janssen says as well, the team's window to win is right now. We heard about 92 and 93, and I think we're tired of hearing about it. We want to put our stamp on Toronto and across baseball. For me, in my 8 years here, I've never been this close, never had an opportunity to make it to the playoffs. And I think that's where the excitement level for this trade deadline was. It's finally our time. We're finally beating that door down, and we wanted to come onto the scene as strong as we possibly could. Like I said, it just didn't happen. Obviously, we value prospects. We value players. I'm sure the other teams do as well. Maybe they just value the player or opportunity to get into the playoffs more. It takes something to get something, and congratulations to those teams that got those guys. That is sour grapes from your 2 longest tenured players. As I said, Jansen had been there 8 years. Bautista had just obviously broken out basically 3 years in a row, had 3 straight breakout seasons. I remember that being very much like, this team is either going to get aggressive or they're going to completely implode, because that was the sign of like, holy cow. It's rare that you heard players speak with such candor.
I think it was completely justified, especially when you look at sort of how the season up to that point and the rest would go. And, I know that in baseball, it's not cool to talk about sort of momentum and mindset things, but they obviously exist. Mm-hmm. And those kind of things matter. And you look at what happened in 2014, they were, as you said, they started the month up by a game on the AL East. They have a really rough first 18 days of July. They only win 4 games in the first 18 days of July. But from July 19th to July 31st being the trade deadline, from the 19th to 31st, they go 2-5. They go
11-2
leading up to the trade deadline, including 6 straight wins leading to the 31st. And the team did everything they could really to try and push the front office to make a deal, which is, we talked about that a ton this year, of just be competitive to the trade deadline and give a reason to go out and trade prospects and make some ads. And then immediately following the deadline, after all of that, all the talk we just heard from Jose and Casey Janssen, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They only win 9 games in August.
It's an emotional team. Quite frankly, it was an emotional team and we obviously saw that again in the follow-up year. They very much played with their heart on their sleeves. I think the parallels between this and 2021 are really interesting because sort of the distance they were back. And I think 2021 is also an emotional team, one that it's a little more of a positive emotional team, but it's hard to believe that they would approach the deadline, as you said, having gone 11-2 and 10 games over 500. And within 26 days, they are back to 500 at 66-66. That's amazing. 10 games back within 3 weeks. That's unbelievable.
If you've been on Baseball Reference and you kind of look at the schedule and results page, and you can kind of track the games behind, it looks like literally almost every game. If you just scroll down August, each game they get further and further behind. It's quite wild to see. They went from a game and a half back on July 31st, the day of the deadline, to 10 and a half back on August 31st. That is a collapse.
And maybe a harbinger of things to come. But if you look at the attendance tab, low key, these teams are drawing, they were drawing 35, 36, 45 on the weekend against the Tigers, down later in the year, 28, 38. Leading up to that run, they are drawing that magical 35 to 40,000, and then in the end on September it's 10,000, 11,000. It's such a story of how this team works in this city. Of if they get any buzz at all, people come out and go haywire for it, and then when things go off the rails, they completely fall off the map. I think it's a really interesting sort of microcosm this year, 2014, of what it was like. And this is going to sound stupid to say, is that 2014 is a good idea of what it was like before 2015. But it's very much of before they finally did break through, this is what it always felt like to be a Jays fan. It was they would never take the full step forward. We talked about this earlier. And even after the Reyes trade, it wasn't that we weren't satisfied. It was that the team wasn't complete. They had added some things. They had got a shortstop. They had added some speed, some contact hitting, but there were still, as you said, very obvious holes that they weren't making the mid-level, the middle moves. They made the big splashes. They didn't make the complementary moves. And I think to finish off that comparison to the 2021 team is immediately after that Barrios deal at the deadline, how much they immediately went on a hot streak. I know it was then followed up by a streak where they couldn't score at all, but though in 2015 as well, those deadline moves, those big splashes can really change the mood of the clubhouse. And you could say pretty definitively that in 2014, it changed that mood for the worse.
Yeah. And I think you saw that in 2015 as well. The Price and Tulo deal spurned one of the craziest second halves we've ever seen. But obviously we're going to talk more in the next episode about one of these games, these August games. But to your point about they were having the draw, there was I think because this season became such a disaster, and because 2015 and 2016, and to a lesser extent 2020 and 2021 are what they are, people forget that there was as you said, there was legitimate excitement about the Blue Jays in Toronto for the first time in 20 years, I guess. Like, it really was. I think that's what made this collapse kind of so hard to take, was like, it really felt like, okay, this is like, they're beating teams and they're beating like also a thing I just noticed, those 6 wins to the trade deadline. Three of those were a sweep of Boston in Boston right before the deadline. And you had Jose Bautista being exciting. This was the year that like Marcus Stroman showed up and we were like, oh wow, he might be like, this was the season that caused us all to be so upset when Stroman got hurt in spring training before 2015.
21-year-old Aaron Sanchez also.
21-year-old Aaron Sanchez. Like, this was, and they were buds still. And it was like, there was a real swagger to the team. And it was just, you know, it's kind of funny in a way when you look at the fact that after this season, they went out and got Josh Donaldson, and then they went and got Troy Tulowitzki and those things, and how it was just like, oh, those are exactly the pieces that they didn't get at the deadline in 2014.
Next episode, we are going to look back at, with great hindsight, gives us the ability to pinpoint maybe where the heart officially breaks in half. We are going to look at a 6.5 hour long 19 inning marathon in front of 46,000 fans at the Rogers Center. Blue Jays, Tigers, maybe the last gasp of the season for this team. We will talk about that and the fallout the rest of the year next week on Sportsfeld Storytime.